Hi everyone, I'm Emily. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a day to feel thankful and spend time with family, but for me, it became one of the hardest days I've ever been through. I'm a senior in high school, and I love architecture and design. This year was important for me because I was working toward my future, but things at home have been different ever since my mom passed away and my dad remarried. Now, my stepmom Susan lives with us, along with her 2 kids. It's been tough, with lots of mixed emotions. My dad tries to keep the peace, which makes it hard for me to talk to him about anything related to Susan. She always finds a way to make everything about her and her kids, and I often feel left out, like I don't belong in my own home. As Thanksgiving got closer, the house was busy with preparations. We were expecting a lot of people, extended family, my dad's close friends, and even some of Susan's friends. Even though I was nervous, I was excited about one thing: my college acceptance letter. I had gotten into one of the best architecture schools in the country, and I planned to surprise everyone by announcing it during dinner. The house smelled amazing, with roasted turkey and pies baking. Everyone gathered around the dining table, chatting and laughing, and for a moment, I felt a little less anxious. I looked around at my cousins talking, my dad telling jokes, and Susan acting like the perfect hostess. When dessert came out, I knew it was my chance. My heart was racing, but I stood up and tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. I have some great news, I said, trying to stay calm. I've been accepted into the architecture program at. But before I could finish, Susan interrupted me. She spoke in a light tone, but her words were hurtful. Oh, Emily, always dreaming. Let's focus on what really matters, okay? Everyone at the table looked confused, but Susan didn't stop there. She reached across the table, grabbed my acceptance letter out of my hand, and tore it into pieces. The pieces fell like sad little bits of confetti. This is what I think of your so-called achievement, she said. It's trash, just like your unrealistic dreams. The room went completely silent, and the air was thick with shock. I stood there, pieces of my acceptance letter scattered on the floor, feeling like my heart had broken just as much. I looked around, hoping someone would stand up for me or say something, but there was only silence, followed by murmurs and awkward looks. My dad, caught between his wife and me, said nothing. With tears in my eyes, I excused myself from the table, the sound of Susan's mocking laughter ringing in my ears as I ran to my room. That night, I realized how truly alone I felt in that house. I came to understand the painful truth that family isn't just about being related by blood, it's about the love and support they choose to give or withhold. This Thanksgiving, I didn't feel grateful. Instead, I was filled with a determination to prove Susan wrong and to reclaim my dreams, no matter what it took. After Thanksgiving, the house was filled with chaos and disbelief. Guests quickly left, whispering as they hurried out. The house felt colder and emptier than ever. In the quiet that followed, I couldn't stop crying. My dad, clearly conflicted, avoided looking at me. His silence confirmed my worst fear. He wasn't going to stand up to Susan, even after everything. Feeling desperate, I called my uncle, who had always been supportive. He picked up right away, and as I told him what had happened, his comforting words gave me a small bit of hope. We'll figure this out, Emily. This isn't the end of your dreams, he reassured me. The next morning, following my uncle's advice, I met my best friend Alex for coffee at a busy cafe. We came up with a plan. We need evidence, Alex said, determined. We need to show your dad who Susan really is, not just because of the college letter, but for all the times she's mistreated you and your step-siblings. Our first step was clear. We needed to confirm my college acceptance. I reached out to the admissions office, explained what had happened, and they were understanding. They promised to send a new letter and an email confirmation. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Alex and I quietly started gathering information from people who knew Susan, former friends, colleagues, and anyone who had experienced her manipulative behavior. The stories we collected were eye-opening. Each one revealed more about Susan's true character. She had sabotaged a step-sibling's job application and even isolated my dad from his old friends. As we pieced everything together, the real Susan became clear, a person who was far more controlling and harmful than I had realized. Susan, perhaps feeling untouchable, began pushing her limits even more. She made big purchases without asking my dad, and her behavior at some of his business events upset important contacts. Her arrogance was affecting not just our family life, but also my dad's professional world. One evening, as I was going through all the evidence we had gathered, my uncle called. It's time, he said. Your dad needs to see this before Susan causes more harm. Armed with a folder of proof, including emails from the college and testimonies from people who had been affected by Susan. I approached my dad. He looked tired, like a shadow of the lively person he used to be. "Dad," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking, "I need you to see something important." As he read through the documents, listened to the recordings, and saw the confirmation of my college acceptance, I could see his emotions shift. He looked sad, but also like he was realizing something big. It was clear that he now had a tough decision to make. Susan had been controlling our lives from behind a mask, pretending to care while secretly manipulating everything. Finally, my dad spoke, his words heavy with meaning. "We need to talk, Emily," he said. "We need to talk about Susan." The plan was set for a Sunday afternoon. We made it seem like a casual family gathering, but it had a serious purpose. This was the day I intended to reveal the truth about Susan, not just to my dad, but to everyone who needed to know. We invited a few key people, those who had dealt with Susan and had their own stories to share. My uncle helped organize everything, making sure everyone understood how important this day would be. It was time to bring the truth to light. As we prepared the living room for our guests, my uncle reminded me to stay calm. When people started arriving, the atmosphere was filled with tension and anticipation. Susan greeted everyone with her usual charm, completely unaware of what was about to happen. My dad, sensing something was up, stayed quiet, giving me a questioning look. Once everyone was seated, I stood up. My hands were shaking slightly, but my voice was strong. "Thank you all for coming today," I began. "I know this seems like a regular gathering, but it's important. It's about my future, and the future of our family." I glanced at my dad, who nodded for me to continue. "This isn't easy, but it's necessary. Many of you have had experiences with Susan that were less than positive, and today we are bringing those to light, not out of spite, but to find the truth." I turned to Mrs. Johnson, a former colleague of Susan's. She shared how Susan had undermined her work project, leading to her unfair demotion. After she spoke, others began to share their stories. Mr. Thompson, our neighbor, talked about a community event that Susan ruined by interfering. With each story, the picture of Susan's manipulative behavior became clearer. Susan's face grew pale, and her usual calm demeanor began to slip as more people spoke. My dad's expression darkened with each new revelation, as he started to piece together the truth he had been avoiding. When it was my turn, I held up my shredded college acceptance letter, now taped back together, a symbol of what Susan had done. "This was my college acceptance letter, which Susan tore up on Thanksgiving," I said. "It should have been a night of celebration, but it turned into one of the worst nights of my life." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of what had happened. My dad, who had been quietly listening the entire time, finally stood up. His usual indecision was gone, replaced with determination. "I can't ignore this any longer," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Susan, these actions cannot be part of this family." Susan tried to defend herself, making excuses and denying everything, but the evidence was too strong. Her true nature had been revealed, and there was no way for her to hide anymore. As the gathering came to an end and the guests began to leave, my dad stopped me at the door. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, his eyes filled with regret. "I should have seen this sooner. We'll fix this. We'll make things right." That day marked a turning point. It was the beginning of the end of Susan's control over our lives, and the start of a new chapter, one led by truth and integrity. After that day, the fallout for Susan was fast and severe. Word of her actions spread quickly through the community, and her carefully built image fell apart. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves from her, not wanting to be associated with her manipulative behavior. Even her social media profiles became ghost towns, reflecting how isolated she had become in real life. The effects of Susan's behavior didn't just hurt her socially, they also impacted her financially. With her reputation ruined, she found herself isolated from the social circles she once ruled. She lost business opportunities, and the financial strain began to show. Her once carefully controlled world turned into a place of uncertainty and rejection. Meanwhile, with my dad's support, I was able to focus on my future. He helped me reapply to the architecture school, and this time I not only got accepted but also received a scholarship. The pride in his eyes as he handed me the acceptance letter made my heart swell. It was a moment of redemption and a new bond between us. When I moved to campus early, I fully immersed myself in my studies. The college environment was so different from the suffocating atmosphere back home. Here, I wasn't just the girl from a troubled family, I was Emily, the aspiring architect. I thrived in my classes, with my designs praised for their creativity and attention to the environment. The freedom to express myself and be appreciated for my talent was amazing. Back home, my dad decided to file for divorce from Susan. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary for our family to heal. He shared updates with me during our weekly calls, and each conversation felt like a step toward healing the emotional wounds Susan had left behind. A key moment of my new beginning came one sunny afternoon at a cafe near campus. I was surrounded by new friends, chatting with my dad and uncle over video call. I opened another letter from my college, this time inviting me to an exclusive architectural workshop in Europe because of my potential and achievements. As I read the letter aloud, my friends cheered, and my dad and uncle proudly congratulated me. It was a moment of pure joy, showing just how far I had come. My journey, from betrayal to success, was not just about achieving academic or personal victories. It was about taking back control of my life and my identity, which Susan had tried to twist and ruin. This chapter of my life closed with the promise of new adventures, learning, and growth, all built on a foundation of truth, resilience, and the unwavering support of those who truly cared about me. As the sun set over the cafe that day, I realized that the best way to overcome everything wasn't just to survive, it was to thrive. I had proven that no one could stop me from reaching my dreams. That's the end of my story, and I've triumphed over the challenges that were thrown at me. Now, here's a question for you. Do you believe it's always possible to turn personal betrayal into a stepping stone to success? Or are some wounds too deep to heal from? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of resilience and redemption, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Your support helps us keep sharing these kinds of narratives. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing your responses.
You can't have children, right? That's why I'm entrusting you with this child. Be grateful. If you can't bear a child, at least contribute to society by raising one. I struggled to comprehend what was being said to me. Then, unbelievably, my sister abandoned her daughter, who was suffering from a rare disease. Is this really what a parent should do? We will make sure this child is happy and make her regret abandoning her, I vowed. My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old and have been a housewife for 8 years. Initially, my in-laws often pressured us about having children. My friends talked about the wonders of parenthood, yet also mentioned the lack of freedom, sleepless nights, and sacrifices made out of love. But my husband and I despised that notion. It's not that we dislike children, we're just not good with them. That's an undeniable fact. After 8 years, it seemed like everyone realized and stopped bringing it up. I know it's selfish, but right now, I have too many things I want to do and can't devote time to a child. Such parents wouldn't be good for any child. I was raised as an adopted child, so I'm not fixated on blood relations. I even thought about adopting when I got older. My husband, Henry, is understanding. He always says, if we're blessed with a child, I'll mainly take care of it and support you. People who can't have children might envy us, but as someone who was abandoned by her parents, I couldn't be irresponsible. Friends' kids who were in elementary school or kindergarten seemed well-educated and cute. Maybe children born out of desire feel their parents' love. Of course, I consider the two who raised me as my real parents, and I'm grateful for them. I have an older sister who is 2 years my senior. Her name is Linda. Our parents wanted siblings but could only have one, so they adopted me. We got along well when we were young, but she started to dislike me as I had better grades. You wouldn't be compared, and all the money would have been spent on me if you weren't here, she once said. For the sake of my parents' honor, I must say that they showered both of us with love and resources, not just mentally but emotionally too. They never compared us, not once. It was only Linda who felt inferior on her own. She just chose not to study, whereas I did. That led to comparisons, and it was frustrating for me, maybe because she hated studying. Linda decided to pursue a career as an internet idol, using our parents' money to purchase all the necessary equipment. However, she never truly put in the effort. Looking at successful people, one might think it's easy, but it requires relentless work. That was always Linda's problem, underestimating things. Despite not lacking in looks, Linda had her fans, and among them, the most generous was Mark. They ended up in a shotgun marriage, perhaps because Linda thought he was wealthy. Unfortunately, it turned out he was in debt from spending on her. Even our parents hesitated, but not wanting to see their grandchild suffer, they paid off his debts and secured him a job. The job paid well. With Linda and her husband's lives finally stabilizing, unfortunately, Linda's poor financial sense persisted, preventing them from saving anything. Then, one day, Linda's daughter, Karen, suddenly fell ill. There were signs earlier, but Linda's reluctance to seek medical help due to stinginess had delayed intervention. When I arrived after Linda's urgent call, Karen was lying in bed connected to tubes. I was informed that Karen's kidneys were failing, and they wanted me to get tested to see if I was a match. While I would have refused if it were just for Linda's sake, I was fond of Karen. She was remarkably sensible for a 7-year-old, and I often thought of her as the kind of daughter I'd like. Despite my expectations, I turned out to be a match. "Please, I'll definitely make it up to you," save Karen, Linda begged. I wanted to believe her sincerity, so I agreed to the test. After the successful operation, Karen was out of danger. However, the real challenges emerged afterward. Linda hadn't insured Karen, leading to substantial medical costs. Then, Linda approached me again, pleading for financial assistance. "I can't ask our parents anymore, and I need this to be kept secret," she confided. I wondered about Mark's role, given his decent salary from the job Dad had found for him. But Linda sneered. "That salary is nothing if our parents find out about our spending. Mark might get fired, and we'd be on the streets. Is that what you want?" Though tempted to agree, especially with Karen's health at stake, I couldn't bear to see her being used as a pawn. "I'll lend you the money, but you have to write a promissory note," I insisted. Linda reluctantly agreed, signing the note without bothering to read it. Reflecting on this, I realized why Linda never managed to save any money. Her habit of exploiting situations, even her daughter's illness, was despicable. Despite having such parents, Karen turned out well, which impressed me greatly. After that, I began visiting Karen's hospital room more often. Was it because I had donated a kidney or because I had lent them money? No, it was out of pity for Karen. Karen mentioned to me that I visited more frequently than Linda, who now seemed to regard me with coldness. After a lengthy course of treatment, Karen ended up needing a wheelchair for mobility. Then, on the day she was to be discharged, an incident occurred. An unknown number called, and since it was my day off, I answered. "Hello, is this Sarah's phone?" "This is General Hospital," the voice said. "Karen's hospital. Thank you." "You have the right number," I replied. "Sorry to bother you, but Karen's hospital bill is unpaid, and today she's supposed to be discharged. But no one has come for her, and we can't reach her parents." A sudden chill ran down my spine, and my heart clenched. Without realizing it, I was already on my way to the hospital. I got into a taxi and called Linda. "What are you doing today? Is today Karen's discharge day?" I couldn't stay calm and ended up shouting. "Can you lower your voice? I can hear you," Linda replied calmly. "I don't want that kid, so I'm giving her to you. It's perfect since you can't have children, right? If you can't have your own, at least contribute to society by raising one." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're the worst, just like my birth parents. You don't deserve to be a parent," I exclaimed. "And what about the hospital bills?" I could hear Linda's laughter over the phone. "Sorry, I spent it. It's hard to resist when you suddenly get a lot of money. I've been wanting to do something for a while. It's useless to tell Mark. He can't go against me. He married an idol like he wanted. He can't resist me. He's fine with getting rid of the child anyway. We can't pay, so if you don't take her, she might as well be gone, right?" I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. I don't remember, but maybe my birth parents were like this, I thought. This is my battle of mourning, a revenge against the parents who abandoned me, more than anything. I couldn't bear the thought of handing Karen over to Linda. "Fine, I'll pay the hospital bills and take Karen as my child. Consider it a severance payment," I declared. "Really?" I was worried about how to repay the money I borrowed. But you'll pay that too? Linda's heartless reasoning appalled me. With a total of $100,000 gained and a chance to reset my life, the idea of abandoning a daughter in a wheelchair to have another child solely for future support felt utterly repugnant. I didn't want to continue the conversation. I hung up, apologizing profusely to the hospital, completing the payment promptly, and arranging, through lawyers, a private adoption for Karen to officially become our child. When Karen officially became ours, I was apprehensive about Henry's reaction. To my relief, he embraced the decision warmly. "That's why I love you," he said tenderly. "I can't forgive Linda either. A family of 3 will surely be fun." His words moved me to tears. I felt immensely grateful to have married such a wonderful person. My parents probably thought it was best for Karen's rehabilitation and care to be with us. They even offered to help. Linda seemed somewhat resentful, perhaps worried about our parents discovering the truth about the money. She didn't dare visit. When I honestly explained the situation to Karen, she surprised me with her calm acceptance. "So Mom and Dad never visited me. Now, Sarah, you're my mom." "Sorry if I'm not used to it yet," she said softly. Though she accepted it outwardly, I could sense her silent tears. I used to think I had so many things I wanted to do, but now, Karen has become my reason for living. Having been involved with her since birth, albeit indirectly, it didn't take long for me to develop deep affection. Witnessing a young child struggling and crying during rehabilitation, even if she's not my biological child, filled me with determination to support her. Karen was a real trooper, finding ways to overcome obstacles with her indomitable spirit. Despite her disability, Karen always gave her best, and I, consumed by supporting her to the fullest, forgot about the money concerns. With the unwavering support of my parents, Karen grew rapidly through rehabilitation. She gained some movement in her right leg, still relying on a wheelchair but becoming more capable with each passing day. When Karen turned 9, she expressed a desire to emulate a particular person. By then, she had grown accustomed to calling me Mom and Henry Dad. She showed me a video of a blind pianist. "That's cool, but it must be hard, right? Don't you need a special sense for that?" I asked. To my astonishment, Karen opened a piano app on her tablet and effortlessly played the piece from the video. "Did you practice a lot?" I inquired. "Well, I just listened and remembered it. It's kind of like I just get it," she explained. Impressed, I asked her to play a commercial jingle from TV, and once again, she flawlessly reproduced it after hearing it just once. "That's incredible. Maybe you have perfect pitch," I mused. Excitedly, I showed Henry, who was equally amazed. "Let's buy a grand piano and maybe build a bigger room for it. Perhaps we should consider building a new house," he suggested. Over the next 2 years, Henry had become a devoted father, always spoiling Karen. 5 years later, Linda reached out through our parents, prompting a discussion. I left the kids with my parents and met Linda and Mark in the living room of my childhood home, careful not to reveal our current address. "What do you want?" I asked bluntly, noticing the drastic changes in Linda's appearance. "You moved away and cut off all contact. And what's with that figure?" "I hardly recognize you," I added. My parents had informed me that Linda was amidst divorce proceedings due to infidelity, and she had gained weight from overeating and drinking. Mark was there, seemingly coerced by Linda. He probably wanted to see his daughter one last time, but he seemed disappointed not to find her there. Since then, Linda and Mark hadn't had any more children, and I couldn't help but see it as poetic justice. I would lose faith in any god that would repeatedly bless such irresponsible people with children. However, I remained grateful that they gave me Karen. "You're not asking for money again, are you?" I asked skeptically as Linda began her plea. "Please, I need treatment. I've developed diabetes from binge eating and drinking. I can't work, and the treatment is expensive. We may not be blood related, but we're still sisters, right? Help me," she pleaded, her gestures seeming insincere. I began by returning the $50,000. Linda looked confused. "You didn't read the promissory note, did you? I guess you don't have it anymore." That money is a settled issue, isn't it? It's insincere to bring it up now, she retorted, her tone grating on my nerves. Irritated, I decided to enlighten her. I only waived the money I paid for your hospitalization. I never said anything about waiving the loan. You misunderstood. And since we couldn't find you, we gave up. Remember, I said I'd take the hospital and surgery expenses as severance. You haven't repaid the money you embezzled, but now I can claim it, I explained. Linda, defiant as ever, responded, I came here because I have no money, and now you're going to bill me? Just then, the door of the next room swung open, revealing Karen. Dignified even with pain etched on her face, Karen had inherited all the good features from Linda, making her an extraordinary beauty. Is that Karen? You've grown? Linda exclaimed, attempting to regain control. Look, you can tell, right? She's grown up to be so much like me. Karen's disdainful look was palpable. Who are you? She asked coldly, her tone cutting through the tension. Karen, don't talk like that. She's your mom, Linda insisted. Karen pointed at me and Henry. Mom is right here, and Dad is next to her, she declared firmly. I felt tears welling up. I had become a doting parent too, something I never thought would happen. Besides, you have a $50,000 debt and are getting divorced, right? How are you going to raise Karen, who still needs a wheelchair? I interjected. Mark can take care of it, Linda replied arrogantly. Of course, he can't defy me. Seriously, is she an idiot? She muttered under her breath, unaware that Karen was already defying her by going through divorce proceedings. Then, unexpectedly, Mark stood up, declaring, Enough is enough. I'm fed up. I can't stand it anymore, Sarah. I'm sorry for everything. I promised to pay off the debt. Mark, who had always been submissive, was now red-faced and angry at Linda. I'll take over the compensation money for you and start over. The debt is only being shouldered temporarily. I don't want to trouble Karen anymore. Even if I'm a failed father, I must take responsibility. Addressing Linda directly, Mark continued, I heard from friends that you've been bad-mouthing me behind my back. Now you have 0 fans. You're betraying me too. Linda tried to act tough, but Mark's words seemed to hit her hard. Her face turned bright red as Mark turned to us and said he would contact us later, then left. While I didn't sympathize with Mark, I hoped he wouldn't be brainwashed again by Linda. Then Henry dropped a bombshell. By the way, Mom and Dad know about your current debt. They told me not to come out today. They didn't want to see their own daughter's downfall and wanted to protect my son. Linda had misunderstood. Not wanting kids and being unable to have them are entirely different. We just chose not to, I clarified. I patiently explained the adoption to Linda, informing her that she no longer had parental rights. Linda blustered one last time before finally relenting. As she left in a hurry, I showed her a video site featuring Karen. What's this? Why is Karen in it? Linda asked. Karen has perfect pitch. We made videos of her playing impromptu piano pieces as part of her rehabilitation, and they went viral. She's now a famous influencer for her beauty and talent, I explained. Since then, Mark had apologized and worked hard, borrowing money from my parents for the job they'd helped him get. My father trusted Mark and decided to lend him the money interest-free, with a promise that Mark would pay back monthly. Now Linda, with no one to turn to and estranged, was reportedly suffering from diabetes and living on welfare. She was unrecognizable from her days as an internet idol. I had initially thought Karen would thwart my dreams, but thanks to her, my dreams had come true. Karen had received numerous invitations to perform worldwide, not just as a wheelchair pianist, but for her pure talent. My dream was to travel the world, and I fully support Karen as her manager, I proudly declared. As Karen's popularity soared, she often returned to America to spend time with the family. Recently, Karen thanked me out of the blue. Because of you, Mom, I have this life. Your kidney inside me will never be apart, and that makes me happy. These words from Karen were what I had longed to hear, echoing my own feelings towards my birth parents. Karen's music continued to enrich the soul, and I couldn't help but feel vindicated. If Linda hadn't been so twisted, perhaps her life would have been different. Without even seeing them, I felt I understood the likely unhappy lives of my birth parents. Karen had truly become a beacon of light in our lives. My life seemed content, at least that's what I believed. Upon graduating from university, I landed a job at the company of my dreams. Shortly after, I met Ben, who would become my husband, and we tied the knot when I turned 25. Ben was not only financially stable, but also incredibly kind-hearted. 3 years into our marriage, our daughter Deborah, or Debbie as we fondly call her, came into our lives. Her arrival seemed perfectly timed, adding joy to our already blissful existence. As a 30-year-old homemaker, I decided to leave my job to focus on nurturing and caring for Debbie, a decision I never regretted. She was turning 2, her infectious laughter filling our home with happiness each day. Watching her grow was a source of immense joy for me. Ben, equally enamored by our daughter, dedicated his free time to her, allowing me moments of respite on weekends. Thanks to his unwavering support, I maintained a well-rounded life. However, this tranquil routine shattered one fateful weekend when my in-laws, Brian and Carol, unexpectedly visited. My encounters with Carol had been infrequent, and truth be told, I harbored some reservations about her. From the onset of our relationship, Carol's disapproval of me was evident. She questioned my suitability as her son's wife, making disparaging remarks about my upbringing. In response, I often engaged in heated exchanges with her, unable to tolerate her negativity. Yet Brian and Ben, averse to conflict, urged restraint, attempting to quell any confrontations. Right from the outset, Carol and I never seemed to see eye to eye. So when Brian and Carol unexpectedly showed up at our doorstep, I was taken aback. Despite my surprise, I had no choice but to welcome them inside. "Brian, Carol, what brings you here?" I inquired, puzzled by their unannounced visit. "Are you daft? We informed you earlier that we'd be coming," Carol retorted sharply. "Well, I'm sorry, I must have forgotten to tell you. My parents are visiting today," Ben interjected apologetically, his forgetfulness not uncommon. Frustrated by the oversight, I quickly prepared tea for everyone, attempting to salvage the situation. As we settled down, I inquired, "How can we assist you today, Brian and Carol?" Surprised by my lack of knowledge, Carol questioned, "Didn't you hear from Ben? I informed him earlier." Feeling a pang of irritation, I shot a glance at Ben, who appeared uncomfortable but proceeded to speak. "Actually, I've been discussing with my parents, and we decided to move in with them." "What?" I exclaimed, caught off guard by the sudden announcement. Ben explained, "With Dad's recent injury, I've been worried about him. Plus, considering their age, it might be best for us to live with them and take care of them." Shocked by Ben's unilateral decision, I struggled to comprehend. Just because you think it's a good idea doesn't mean you shouldn't discuss it with me. This is a significant decision. Ignoring my objections, Carol interjected, "Flora, your opinion isn't relevant here. We're more concerned about what Ben thinks." Feeling sidelined in a decision that deeply affected us both, I insisted, "This is a matter that concerns both husband and wife. Let Ben and I discuss it and come to a decision together." Carol shot me a disdainful look before storming out of our house for the day. Once they had left, I confronted Ben, my frustration evident. "Why didn't you discuss this with me? Deciding something so significant without involving me is not right." "I'm sorry, Flora. I was just worried about my dad." Ben apologized, but I wasn't appeased. "Being concerned about your dad doesn't excuse ignoring me in such matters," I countered, emphasizing the importance of mutual decision-making. Realizing his mistake, Ben promised to involve me in future decisions. "So, what do you think about moving in with my parents?" he asked tentatively. Hesitating, I confessed, "Honestly, I'm not keen on the idea. You know Carol and I don't get along." Ben pleaded, Is there any way you could reconsider? I'll do anything. Protect me from your mother. If you can't, we're headed for a divorce, I asserted firmly, expressing the severity of my discomfort. Ben, taken aback, agreed to shield me from Carol's hostility. With his promise, albeit reluctantly, I consented to the arrangement, with a firm resolve to leave if he failed to uphold his commitment. Weeks later, we moved in with Brian and Carol. As we entered, Carol greeted us with a backhanded remark, but Ben, emboldened by our agreement, stood up for me, demanding respect. Though surprised, Carol relented, offering hospitality. Witnessing Ben's support gave me hope that perhaps living with Carol wouldn't be as daunting as I feared. If he could stand up for me, perhaps we could navigate this arrangement together. After settling our luggage in our room, I joined Brian and Carol in the living room for tea when I heard the front door open. It was Alicia, my sister-in-law. "I'm home," she announced cheerfully. "Are Ben and his family coming over today?" she asked Carol. "Yes, that's what I told you yesterday," Carol replied. Confused, I wondered if Alicia was now living with us. I had thought she had her own place elsewhere. When I inquired about her living arrangements, Alicia casually mentioned that she had been back living with us for 3 months now, a fact Ben had failed to mention. Ben's oversight frustrated me deeply. I coldly glared at him, mentally noting it as strike one against him. 2 more strikes and he would be out. Apologizing for his forgetfulness, Ben's feeble excuse did little to assuage my annoyance. I resolved to have a serious conversation with him later. Life at Carol's house started as expected, with her asserting dominance and immediately assigning me tasks. "Flora, why haven't you cleaned?" she demanded one day. "I've cleaned my room," I retorted. "You haven't cleaned mine or Alicia's room, and the lawn needs mowing," she continued, disregarding my response. "Why should I have to do all of that?" I questioned. "Are you back talking to me? You should be grateful we're letting you stay here," she snapped. I reminded her that we were living there because of Brian's health concerns and that she had invited us. Alicia, siding with Carol, only added to my frustration. Determined to prove them wrong, I took on all the household chores, even mowing the lawn in the scorching heat. Meanwhile, Carol and Alicia played with Debbie, my daughter, without my consent. When Ben returned from work, I relayed everything to him, demanding he address their behavior. During dinner, despite my efforts, Alicia and Carol continued to complain about me, unfazed by my grievances. "What is this dish? It's too bland for my taste. I don't think I can finish it," complained Alicia, pushing her plate away. "I can't believe she's a housewife and a bad cook," remarked Carol, adding insult to injury. Ben, sensing the tension, intervened, putting down his utensils and addressing his mother and sister. "Hey, Alicia, Mom, please don't complain about the food. Flora made it for you to enjoy." Alicia retorted, "Ben, why are you defending your wife for this? Don't you have any dignity as a husband? Do you honestly think this food is good?" "I love Flora's cooking. It's delicious," Ben affirmed, attempting to defuse the situation. Watching Ben fail to stand up to Alicia's dominance, I felt a pang of disappointment. It was the second strike against him in my mind. Despite Ben's feeble defense, the bullying from Alicia and Carol persisted. Every day, they imposed numerous household chores and errands upon me, refusing to accept any objections. Carol even went as far as to assert, "A wife belongs to this family, so it's natural for her to work for the family. You should treat me the same as you treat Carol." Alicia echoed Carol's sentiments, implying that I must obey their commands without question. Frustrated by their unreasonable demands, I began plotting my escape from this oppressive environment, feeling increasingly certain that leaving their house was the only solution. Then, I received a call from my mother informing me that my father had suffered a stroke. While it wasn't severe, he was hospitalized. Hurriedly, I packed my bags to rush back and visit him at the hospital. As I was preparing to leave, Carol entered my room and questioned my actions. "Flora, what are you doing?" Apologizing, I explained, My mother just called to tell me about my father's stroke. I need to visit him at the hospital." In response, Carol made an outrageous statement. "Who said you can leave? This is your home, and there's no other place for you." Feeling overwhelmed by Carol's demands and the toxic atmosphere, I reached my breaking point. Ignoring her, I left the house. At the hospital, I stayed with my parents for a few days, helping my mother with household tasks. During this time, Carol and Alicia incessantly called and left hostile messages demanding my return. Their behavior fueled my anger, and thoughts of divorce and leaving Ben's house crossed my mind. Yet, fueled by resentment towards Carol and Alicia, I decided to take revenge. Preparing for revenge required careful planning. Despite my desire to avoid them, I returned to Carol's house. Even upon my return, Carol and Alicia continued to complain. Such nonsense. About 6 months later, during dinner, Carol excitedly announced, "He proposed to me. I'll bring him over for lunch next time." Feeling a surge of satisfaction, I realized the time for revenge had finally arrived. But my smile didn't go unnoticed by Alicia. "Flora, you're happy for me too, right?" Alicia remarked, misinterpreting my expression. A week later, Alicia brought her fiancé, Ken, to the house. Ken, an accomplished professional with a high income, appeared sincere and respectable. Alicia proudly introduced him to everyone, including me. Observing the scene, Carol seemed pleased and offered her blessings to the couple. Seizing the opportunity for revenge, I engaged Ken in conversation as I served tea. "So, will you be living with your parents after marriage?" I asked casually. "Oh, I haven't decided yet," Ken replied. "I'd heard there's a rule here that if your parents are over 60, you have to live with them," I continued. Surprised, Ken's expression changed. "There's no such rule in my family." I proceeded to inform Ken about the supposed rules and the mistreatment I endured from Alicia and Carol. Ken's discomfort grew evident. Unsure, Ken turned to Alicia for confirmation, but she dismissed my claims as jealousy. Determined to expose the truth, I played recordings of Alicia and Carol's bullying in front of everyone. Shocked and dismayed, Ken swiftly ended the engagement, leaving Alicia in tears. Feeling a sense of vindication, I packed my belongings and left the house with Debbie, leaving divorce papers for Ben. Despite Ben's attempts to reconcile, I stood firm in my decision, frustrated by his lack of support throughout our marriage. Later, I learned that both Ben and Alicia continued to leech off Carol without contributing to household chores. Alicia, devastated by the broken engagement, struggled financially, relying solely on her father's pension. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life, working hard and cherishing moments with my daughter. Though saddened by the situation with Brian's family, I found solace in my newfound independence and commitment to providing a better life for my daughter. I'm a 49-year-old man, and I've been married to my wife, who is 48 years old, for almost 25 years. We've been together since we were in high school. I always knew I wanted to marry her. We have a 24-year-old daughter. Like any married couple, we've had good times and bad times, but mostly good. My wife is shy and sweet, just like me. But recently, we had a big fight, and she's been acting strange since then. The fight was about something weird, and I don't understand why she got so upset about it. I have a niece who is a little younger than my daughter, around 22 years old. She's the daughter of my older brother, who was 6 years older than me. We were very close growing up. Sadly, my brother passed away 2 years ago in an accident. It was really hard for all of us, especially for my niece, my sister-in-law, and me. For a year after his death, I visited them every weekend with my daughter to check on them. I wanted my wife to come too, but she always had an excuse. So I stopped asking her to come. My wife said she didn't want to intrude on our grief because she wasn't close to my brother, and she would feel awkward and insincere. But I don't think that's a good reason. I didn't push my wife further to join us, but over time, my sister-in-law and I became even closer. I tried to comfort my niece, who was feeling the loss of her father deeply. I felt terrible for her because she was around the same age as my own daughter, and I couldn't imagine how hard it would be for her if I were suddenly gone. So I did my best to support her and be there for her. I think she started to see me as a father figure because recently she asked me to walk her down the aisle at her wedding, which is in 3 weeks. To be honest, I always thought my niece might ask me to walk her down the aisle, and I knew I would say yes without hesitation. It would be an honor, and I believed it's what my late brother would have wanted. So when she asked, I immediately agreed. I assumed my wife would be happy about it too, as she seemed to like my niece. But when I told her, she completely lost it. She started yelling, saying that walking a bride down the aisle is a sacred moment only meant for fathers and daughters, not uncles and nieces. She implied that I was trying to take my brother's place, which I found really hurtful. She even accused me of being selfish and not considering how our own daughter would feel knowing I was walking my niece instead of her. I don't agree with her at all. My wife's sudden outburst was completely unexpected and unlike her usual self. I was so taken aback by her behavior that I didn't know how to respond. I just let her yell at me without defending myself because her words hurt, especially when she accused me of trying to replace my brother. After she finished, I retreated to the guest room and stayed there for a couple of hours. She didn't try to talk to me or apologize, which made me feel even worse. I didn't think any of this was my fault. If she had a problem with my decision, she could have talked to me calmly instead of yelling and making accusations. Although her reaction was extreme, she did raise a valid point about our daughter. She and my niece are close friends, and our daughter was supposed to be her maid of honor at the wedding. I hadn't considered how she might feel about me walking my niece down the aisle before her, despite their friendship. After the fight, once I had calmed down, I decided to check in with my daughter to see how she felt about me walking my niece down the aisle. When I called her, she was excited and said she was glad I agreed. Surprisingly, she already knew about my niece asking me and had given her approval because that's what she thought her uncle would have wanted. I was relieved that my daughter was okay with it, as it showed how close they were, just like my brother and I were. Knowing that my daughter was fine with it reassured me that there was nothing wrong with my decision. My wife's reaction seemed baseless and really hurtful, considering the situation. Feeling frustrated by my wife's reaction, I decided to talk to her about it during dinner. I explained how my daughter was okay with me walking my niece down the aisle, so I planned to go ahead with it. I also mentioned that her comment about me replacing my brother was insensitive, and I expected an apology. However, instead of apologizing, she stuck to her earlier statements, which was shocking. Although she didn't yell this time, we still ended up in a heated argument. Things escalated when she said she would leave me if I walked my niece down the aisle. I was stunned and didn't know how to respond. We haven't spoken for 3 days now because neither of us wants to admit fault. I don't think I did anything wrong. Wanting to walk my niece down the aisle isn't wrong, especially when my daughter doesn't mind it. My wife's argument about it being only for fathers and daughters doesn't hold up, in my opinion. However, I don't want to lose my wife over this. I love her deeply, and these past few days have been tough for both of us. I can't imagine life without her, and I'd be devastated if she left. I'm not sure how we're going to resolve this, but I'm open to any advice or opinions. Am I wrong for wanting to walk my niece down the aisle despite my wife's opposition? Update 1. It's been 5 days since our big fight, and we still haven't spoken to each other. We're both living in the same house, but it feels like there's an invisible barrier between us. Whenever I enter a room, she leaves, and vice versa. It's really tough, and I know she's feeling bad too. I heard her crying in the bedroom last night, and it broke my heart. I wanted to go and comfort her, but I didn't know how to. We've had fights before, but nothing as serious as this. It just really sucks. I'm going to give it 1 more day, and then I'll talk to her myself. I can't stand this distance and bitterness anymore. I want things to go back to normal between us. Update 2. Today, I planned to talk to my wife, but she surprised me by bringing me breakfast in bed. I was completely stunned after almost 6 days of not speaking to each other. I was still groggy from just waking up, so it was hard to process everything. Her gesture threw me off guard, especially after days of fighting and ignoring each other. She apologized to me for the hurtful remark she made about me wanting to replace my brother. She admitted she regretted saying it as soon as it left her mouth. She explained that she was just so angry that she didn't think things through. When I asked her what exactly she was mad about, she tensed up a bit, and I noticed. She promised to tell me the reason later. She wasn't ready to share the reason with me yet. Clearly, she was embarrassed about it, but I couldn't understand what could be so embarrassing. It must have been something serious. Even though she hadn't told me the reason, she promised she would soon. She explained that she's been carrying this secret for years. I'm really curious about it, and I even tried to convince her to tell me. But she asked me not to pressure her. So, I respected her request and didn't push harder. Despite that, it's been a good day, and I didn't want to ruin it by starting another fight. I'm just glad that my wife and I are talking again. She means everything to me, and I can't imagine life without her by my side. She apologized for threatening to leave me, admitting that she would be miserable without me. We've been together for over 3 decades, which is a very long time. Regardless of her reason, I know I'll forgive her, and she would do the same for me. I understand that some people might not agree with me, but I know my wife better than anyone else. Whatever the reason may be, I'll accept it. All I want is to be with her for the rest of my life, no matter what challenges come our way. That's all that matters to me. Update 3? Hey everyone. It's been 2 days since the last update, and today my wife finally told me the real reason she was so upset about my decision to walk my niece down the aisle. I'm still in shock. I can't believe she kept this secret for over 25 years just to maintain peace within the family. It's crazy. This whole issue wasn't even about my niece or my daughter. It was actually about my sister-in-law. For context, my sister-in-law, my wife, and I all went to the same high school. My wife and I have known each other since middle school and started dating in our freshman year. A few months after my wife and I started dating, she became friends with my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law and I weren't particularly close at first, even though she and my wife were good friends. It was only after she married my brother that she and I became friends. Before that, she was mainly friends with my wife. They were close through college as well, and my sister-in-law was even a bridesmaid at our wedding. That's where she first met my brother. However, after our wedding, my wife started distancing herself from my sister-in-law. The only reason my sister-in-law and I remained involved in each other's lives was because my wife had been friends with her. I don't think I would have kept in touch with my sister-in-law if it weren't for my wife. She's a nice person, but we weren't close back then. My brother married her a year after I married my wife, and 2 years after that, they had their daughter. Given how close my brother and I were, we often tried to organize playdates for our kids. However, my wife never seemed interested in spending time with my brother and his family. We would sometimes argue about it. She always said she was too tired or too busy, but I could tell she was just making excuses to avoid hanging out with them. So I started visiting my brother and his family without my wife, and she would get upset about that too. But sometimes I needed a break, and my daughter loved playing with her cousin. We didn't meet them very often, maybe once or twice every 2 weeks because they lived far away. I never forced my wife to come along since she clearly wasn't interested. When she did join us, she didn't talk much and mostly interacted with me, my brother, or the kids. No matter how hard we tried to make both our wives feel included, it never seemed to work out. My brother and I even tried to get them to tell us why they fell out, but both of them just said they had grown apart. And it was awkward to be around each other. Let's be real, growing apart hardly seems like a genuine reason to completely ignore someone you used to be close with. Especially since my sister-in-law didn't even ask my wife to be her bridesmaid at her wedding. So we knew something was really off. I was certain something had happened around the time of our wedding. However, life got busy. Our kids were growing up, and our responsibilities increased. We stopped seeing each other as often and stopped dwelling on what had happened years ago. We had bigger problems to worry about. But today, I finally learned what caused the tension between my wife and my sister-in-law. As I mentioned earlier, they used to be close friends, but things changed around the time of our wedding. The reason behind that was a couple of days before the wedding, when my wife and her bridesmaids were having a party just for themselves. My sister-in-law got blackout drunk and confessed that she'd been in love with me since sophomore year. She whispered it to my wife, who was horrified, but didn't say anything at the time. My wife tried to dismiss it as a meaningless drunken confession, but the next day my sister-in-law admitted it was true but said she wouldn't act on it. Still, my wife let her be a bridesmaid because they didn't want to raise any questions. They just didn't want the hassle of explaining why my wife had removed her friend from the bridal party. However, things were never the same after that. They pretty much stopped talking. When my sister-in-law started dating my brother, my wife became insecure, believing she was only marrying into the family to be close to me. Unbeknownst to us, they even got into a nasty fight about this a few weeks before my brother's wedding. My wife accused my sister-in-law of marrying my brother just to be near me, as she believed that someone doesn't just get over feelings they had for so long in just a few months, especially when the person they're marrying is 6 years older. However, my sister-in-law insisted she truly loved my brother, and their marriage had nothing to do with the past. The fact that my brother and I looked similar didn't help the situation. That fight essentially ended any hope for reconciliation, and over time, the bitterness between them only grew. My wife never told me any of this because she didn't want to ruin my brother's marriage. She wasn't even sure if my sister-in-law still had feelings for me or not. It didn't feel that way to me either, and I guess my wife also believed that my sister-in-law truly loved my brother. That's why she decided to keep this secret, no matter how insecure she felt whenever she saw me spending time with my sister-in-law. Everything reached a breaking point last week when I told my wife about my decision to walk my niece down the aisle. She was already feeling insecure and jealous because I had been visiting my sister-in-law after my brother's death. But unlike before, instead of it being my brother, my sister-in-law, and me, it was just me and her. Those old ugly feelings resurfaced, and she didn't know how to deal with them anymore. She tried to suppress them like before, but it wasn't as effective. When I came home and told her about walking my niece down the aisle, she couldn't shake the image of me, my sister-in-law, and my niece being one happy family from her mind. She couldn't even tell me the real reason behind her behavior, which was frustrating for her. As a result, she ended up saying things she shouldn't have. She knew I was assuming the responsibility out of love and respect for my brother, not because I reciprocated any feelings my sister-in-law had for me. All those years ago, my wife didn't know how to handle the overwhelming feelings she had built up inside her. These feelings resurfaced when she saw how my brother's passing brought me and my sister-in-law closer together. That was the real reason behind her reaction. I must have been silent for about 10 whole minutes after she finished telling me everything because it was a lot to process all at once. I couldn't even imagine how my wife had kept this huge secret to herself for the past 2 decades. It would have driven me crazy. She didn't want to disrupt my brother's home, so she kept the truth to herself all these years. I'm amazed by the incredible strength it must have taken for her to do that. My wife has always put other people's feelings before her own, and I'm proud to be married to her. When I thanked her for telling me the truth and for keeping the secret for so long, she broke down in my arms. I was there for her while she let herself cry for the first time in ages. I'm grateful that she finally told me everything. I don't care what the reason was, I'll stay with her no matter what. It's been a few hours, and we haven't spoken about it further. I think she's too emotionally drained right now, so I'll leave it for later. Update 4. Hey everyone. So there's just a week left before my niece's wedding, and yes, I am still going to walk her down the aisle. Now that everything's out in the open, my wife told me that she doesn't mind. She spent enough time with my niece herself, and she knows that my niece is a good kid who deserves to have a father figure on her special day. It's definitely what my brother would have wanted, so she's fine with it. As for my sister-in-law, We've decided to let sleeping dogs lie. We're never going to bring up the past, at least not by ourselves. My wife trusts me, and she knows I would never do anything to hurt her. She apologized for what she said in that fit of rage, and now that I know the reason behind her anger, I know better than to hold it against her. She also knows better than to hold my connection with my brother's family against me. I'll still help her and my niece whenever they need it. But that's about it. So, we're okay on that front. This secret is going to stay between us for the rest of our lives, and we know it's all for the best. We've also decided that my wife needs to seek therapy because she tends to bottle up her feelings until she finally snaps over something really insignificant. She's almost 50 now, and I think it's about time we address this because I don't want her to suffer anymore. She needs to understand that she doesn't always have to put on a brave face to face the world. She can be vulnerable, at least with me. I mean, she is sometimes, but usually only when things get too overwhelming. I want her to know that things don't have to reach that breaking point before she tells me about her problems. She agrees with me, and I'm glad we're on the same page here. We're in this for the long haul. My name is Olivia Johnson, and I'm 36 years old. I have a husband who is 3 years older than me, and we have a son in elementary school. 5 years ago, my husband had an accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down. He had to quit his job, which was really tough for him because he used to be the best salesman in his department. After the accident, he started getting angry with our son and me over small things. Sometimes, he would only realize what he was doing when he saw our son crying. I learned to handle him better and told our son to stay away from his dad when I wasn't around. That helped to reduce the outbursts. Then I started working full-time to support our family. Even though I worked hard, I couldn't earn as much as my husband used to, so I took extra shifts whenever I could to make more money. It was tiring, but I thought I was doing it for my family. I didn't notice how much I was changing until a friend from high school pointed it out. She said I looked very different and much older than before. Her words hurt, but they were true. I used to care a lot about fashion and makeup, but now I focus on practical things and don't keep up with the latest trends. But even after realizing this, I don't have the luxury to enjoy fashion like I used to. Though I felt somewhat pessimistic, I reminded myself that this is only temporary. In a few weeks, our multi-generational home will be completed. The plan is for my family and my in-laws to live there. My in-laws suggested this to help lessen my load a bit. I felt bad about it, but I accepted their offer. My husband was also supportive of the idea. Since we decided on the multi-generational home, he's been in high spirits. He's usually quiet and hard to read, but lately he's been starting conversations with me and our son more often. Our son, not used to his dad talking to him, seems confused but also a bit happy. Before, my husband would yell at our son for reasons that didn't make sense, and our son became overly sensitive to his dad's mood. I have been struggling to improve their relationship, hoping that living in a duplex might help. But when our long-awaited duplex was finally completed, my husband told me he had something to discuss. He mentioned that my mother-in-law would also be present, and I had a bad feeling about it. Despite my apprehension, my husband began to speak with a smile on his face. "I can finally tell you, Olivia," he said. I was advised to keep silent until the duplex was finished, but I've been looking forward to this day. I was puzzled, not quite grasping what he was trying to convey. Then, with a casual tone, as if he were talking about today's weather, he said, "Olivia, let's get a divorce, and from now on, let's lead separate lives." It took me a few minutes to understand my husband's words. However, it seemed he took my silence as an agreement and triumphantly spread a divorce paper on the table. The document looked legitimate, with signatures from both him and my in-laws. Unable to accept the reality, I looked up, thinking it might be some kind of distasteful prank. But my husband's expression instantly crumbled that thought. I felt the determined resolve in his eyes, a promise to absolutely divorce me. Instinctively, I turned to my mother-in-law for support. But with an unreadable expression, she simply said, "Sign the paper." I felt betrayed. I thought things were going well with both my husband and my mother-in-law, but perhaps it was only me. Tears welled up as I bit my lower lip and looked down. Meanwhile, my husband continued to speak. "You could take our son, Olivia," he said. "He would be happier. Besides, with my health condition, it's impossible for me to take care of him." I cut him off. "Hold on. I never agreed to getting a divorce. You never said anything about this. You can't just decide all this on your own." I voiced my displeasure. During the brief silence, I asked, "First off, what do you plan to do without me? Do you realize how much I've supported you?" As soon as my husband heard these words, his expression changed. His face turned red, and he glared at me, yelling, "That's what I can't stand about you, your self-righteous way of talking. I didn't choose to be like this, yet you always look worn out, acting as if you're the only one suffering. I feel blamed every time. I'm fed up with you and your victim complex." I lost my words, hearing the true feelings of my husband. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. Seeing me crying, my husband looked annoyed and said, "See, you always play the victim, right, Mom? You'd agree that a wife like her who can't even respect her husband isn't suitable for me, right? Don't worry, my new partner is young and beautiful, and I'm sure you'll like her." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Finally, I understood the real reason why my husband wanted a divorce. He was having an affair, and he was trying to get rid of me, the obstacle to be with his mistress. I never thought my husband would cheat on me, not because of his personality, but because I thought there was no chance for him to meet someone else. But I was wrong. He told me how he met his mistress. He met her online, and through texting each other every day, they developed feelings and fell in love. Learning about this whole online dating thing was bewildering for me. Looking back, my husband had been glued to his phone recently. Moreover, when he was engrossed in his phone, he seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood, oblivious to my husband's affair. I would think to myself, it's nice to see him in a good mood today. Yet, for all I knew, he may have been secretly inviting that woman over to our place when I wasn't around. Just the thought of it was enough to make my blood boil. Despite our arguments, I had never once considered leaving him before. But now, after hearing his true feelings, I just couldn't imagine being with him any longer, even if he took back his words and said, "I don't want a divorce after all." I was now determined to leave him. As I made this decision, I heard a loud slap. Startled, I looked up to see my mother-in-law, her face twisted in an expression I had never seen before. My husband's cheek bore a red handprint. Realizing she had slapped him, I was taken aback. I would never have expected my mother-in-law to lay a hand on her son. She turned to me, deeply bowing her head in apology. "I'm really sorry. I apologize for letting you take care of such a despicable son." As she uttered these words, her face a mask of profound regret, my mother-in-law said, "Olivia, you're too good for my son. You've done so much for him, more than we could ever thank you for. My husband and I were looking forward to living with you too, but it seems you'll be better off without our son." She continued, "We will make sure you receive proper alimony and child support, so please go ahead and divorce him." My husband, his face beet red, tried to retort, but a glare from his mother shut him up. A different kind of tears welled up at my mother-in-law's words. They brought both relief and sadness. Regardless of my husband, I was saddened at the prospect of ending my relationship with my in-laws. Encouraged by my mother-in-law, I filled out the divorce papers. And just like that, my husband and I became strangers. After parting with him, I returned to my parents' house with my son. They said it was fine to stay with them until things settled down, so I decided to take them up on their offer. I planned to continue working as before but discussed reducing my workload with my boss. I was considering changing jobs if needed, but my boss agreed to accommodate me without hesitation. To be honest, it took me by surprise. Apparently, my boss had been worried about my excessive workload for a while now. With a wry smile, he said, "I was actually worried you might collapse one day, but knowing your situation at home, I didn't say anything. Feeling guilty, I bowed my head and apologized to my boss for causing him concern. He quickly shook his head, saying, No, it's just me worrying too much. But thinking about it, it's good that you left your ex-husband. His words brought a smile to my face, and I nodded in agreement. I'd also told my coworkers about my divorce. I thought it would be better to let everyone know since I was reducing my workload. I was anxious about their reaction, but when I honestly told them the reason for my divorce, they threw a party for me. I was taken aback by this, but it was a relief that the atmosphere didn't become serious. Although I had awful luck with men, I had the best colleagues at my workplace. By the time all the paperwork had settled, I took our son and left my parents' home. We chose a small apartment as our new home. It was a far cry from the spacious house we were supposed to be living in, but our son didn't show any discontent. Perhaps because he no longer had to worry about his father, he became more vocal about his opinions, and his demeanor brightened. It was a change that made me truly appreciate our separation from my ex-husband. The effects of the separation were apparent in me too. By the time I'd finished unpacking after the move, a friend came to visit and celebrate our new home. The last time we met, she was concerned about my well-being, but when she saw me today, she laughed and said that I looked younger than ever. I couldn't help but laugh along. Everything started going smoothly, almost comically so, after the divorce. I suppose my old self was under so much stress, physically and mentally. Now I realized I was merely a mate for my ex-husband back then. I still can't forgive my ex-husband, and I don't want to see him, but I do meet my in-laws once a month now. A while ago, my son got a fever, but I absolutely couldn't take a day off of work that day. And to make matters worse, my parents weren't available either. Out of desperation, I reached out to my in-laws. They immediately came over to take care of my son. We used to barely communicate due to the situation with my ex-husband, but since that day, we make sure to meet at least once a month. They thanked me for letting them see their grandson, but I was grateful that they still loved my son even after the divorce. My son occasionally mentioned his grandparents, but he never said he wanted to see them, perhaps out of consideration for me. However, he did ask how they were doing. After all, they were his beloved grandparents. To be honest, I didn't want to take his grandparents away from him, so it was a relief to know they wanted to see him too. By the way, my son never once mentioned my ex-husband. Even my in-laws knew that we didn't want to see him. However, my ex-husband had a different idea. I was utterly surprised when I heard from my mother-in-law that my ex-husband was considering getting back with us. I thought that things were going well with his mistress. According to my mother-in-law, the mistress moved in shortly after we left. It seemed like they had it all planned out. The mistress was delighted to see the new house and moved in without even getting permission from my in-laws. They were taken aback, but decided to act as if my ex-husband and his new partner didn't exist. At first, the mistress seemed pleased with the minimal interaction with my in-laws, but soon she started showing signs of discontent. Apparently, she thought that my in-laws would be helping with the household chores. She complained about it to my ex-husband. He then said to his parents, "What's this all about? Didn't you promise to help with the housework?" To this, my mother-in-law replied, "We did promise, but that was with Olivia, not with you two." And she ignored anything he said after that. Left with no choice, my ex-husband tried to get the mistress to do everything that I used to do. At first, she reluctantly did as told, but every complaint from my ex-husband caused more strain between them. Eventually, his mistress had enough and left the house, slamming the divorce papers at my ex-husband. I thought to myself, my ex is pretty bad, but that mistress is quite something too. My mother-in-law, with a bitter smile, commented that my ex-husband's behavior afterwards was the real problem. He refused to admit that he was at fault and blamed his mistress for getting dumped by saying that he got tricked by her. Furthermore, there was no one left to take care of my ex now that his mistress was gone. He couldn't rely on my in-laws either. As a result, for some reason, he thought that if we reconciled, everything would return to how it was. He probably has forgotten the things he did. He told my in-laws that he wanted to get back together with me and asked for their help. When I heard about this, I couldn't help but shudder at the thought of living with my ex again. My mother-in-law quickly reassured me, saying, "Don't worry, we firmly refused." My ex, scolded by my in-laws, gave up on seeing me but now wanted to see our son. My in-laws also refused this. Finally, my in-laws told my ex that if he caused any more trouble to me or our son, they would sever family ties and kick him out. This finally made him give up. It would be difficult for my ex, who was well received by his neighbors and friends, to live relying on others besides his family. I'm glad that my in-laws are not on my ex's side. From now on, I plan to make good use of my past experiences and do my best without pushing myself too hard. I'd also want to cherish the time with my son and make lots of memories that we couldn't before. My name is Gloria, and ever since I was a kid, I'd always had a lot of energy. I never missed a day of school, from when I was little all the way through high school. Even after I turned 20 and started working, I managed to stay healthy without any major sicknesses until I turned 35. But when I hit 30, I noticed I wasn't as energetic as before. So I started exercising more and being careful about what I ate. Being positive since I was young helped me cope with things. But there was a time when I got really sick for the first time in my life, and it was tough. It even led to me getting a divorce. I felt like everything was falling apart, and I lost hope for a while. But now I've gotten better, and I've accepted what happened. When I turned 40, I started feeling strange. I'd get hot easily, feel out of breath even with small tasks, and get irritated over little things. At first, I thought it was just part of getting older, but it started affecting my life more. So I began to suspect something else might be wrong. Even though I was scared, my mother-in-law encouraged me to go to the hospital. Reluctantly, I went, and it turned out I had Graves' disease, a condition where my thyroid gland wasn't working properly. It caused symptoms like feeling hot, trouble sleeping, irritability, and weakness. It's more common in women, and if left untreated, it can lead to serious health problems. There's no complete cure, but I started treatment with medication from the hospital. The treatment didn't work right away, and I had to take time off from work to get better. Thankfully, my boss and coworkers were supportive. But sometimes, I'd worry that I'd never feel normal again and end up crying alone at night. My in-laws were always concerned about me. During weekdays when Orlando was at work, his parents would call to check on me, asking if I needed anything. Orlando's parents are really nice people. They've always been kind to me, especially after my illness was diagnosed. They made sure not to bother me too much, keeping phone calls short and never visiting without warning. I respect them a lot, almost like my own parents. But I tried not to show them how much I was struggling to avoid worrying them. However, Harriet, Orlando's mom, could see through my act. She told me it's normal to feel anxious about being sick, but nobody is to blame for it. She advised me to rest and focus on improving my health. She said the best way to do that is to rely on the people around me and cooperate with them. She even said they consider me like their own daughter and encouraged me not to hesitate to ask for help. Her words were so kind that they made me cry. But then Orlando, with his heartless words, made me wonder if he was really raised by such kind parents. Orlando and I didn't have any problems living together before my illness was discovered. But once I started feeling unwell, his attitude completely changed. Instead of being concerned, he acted as if I was a burden to him. I was too tired, both mentally and physically, to respond most of the time. There were days when I was too exhausted to even move. Of course, I had to ask him to buy groceries or eat out because I couldn't manage it myself. But whenever I asked, Orlando would sigh heavily, showing his annoyance. He complained about having to eat fast food because I couldn't cook. It seemed like his way of making things difficult for me, knowing I was too sick to cook. He often brought fried chicken, insisting that I needed to eat to regain my strength. I understood his reasoning, but when I couldn't eat, he'd scold me for not appreciating his effort. If I couldn't keep up with the housework and there was dust, he'd yell at me for the dirty floors. And when I was well enough to cook and he tasted the food, he'd complain that it tasted different from usual, questioning my cooking skills or whether I was losing my sense of taste. He'd eat the food I cooked, but then retreat to his room without saying a word. I realized something had to change, so I tried talking to Orlando about my illness and the difficulties I was facing, hoping for his support. "You're really sick. I mean, you never even had a cold before, so suddenly being ill? I gotta say, it's hard to believe," he said skeptically. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, it's suspicious. You were always healthy, and now you're suddenly sick. I find it hard to trust," he replied. I raised my voice, feeling shocked. How can anyone predict getting sick? Even I was shocked. "But still, your illness has nothing to do with me. If housework is too hard, you can do it when you feel better. I married you thinking I wouldn't have to care for you in the future since you were always healthy. This feels like a betrayal," he said, laughing. Hearing him laugh, any remaining affection I had for him vanished. Orlando was never good with housework and wasn't very cooperative, but he was serious about his job and took care of the kids, so we managed. But I never expected him to be so indifferent, almost like it was someone else's problem. His hurtful words left me speechless, and I ended the conversation there. Later, he realized his mistake and apologized, but I ignored him. Our relationship completely broke down from that conversation. Determined not to rely on such a man, I pushed through the pain to do the housework. After finishing, I'd lock myself in the bedroom, avoiding Orlando as much as possible. At first, he tried to please me with flowers and cakes, but when he realized my feelings wouldn't change, he stopped trying. Then, in June of a certain year, when the weather was bad with continuous rain and low pressure making me feel worse than usual, Orlando said after returning from work, "There's a wedding next Saturday of a relative living out of state. My parents and I are planning to go, but with your condition and their long travel, you don't have to. It's an overnight trip, so we'll be back Sunday evening." "Out-of-state relatives? Do you even have such relatives?" I asked. "We haven't met them much. It's natural to keep in touch just because we're family. You wouldn't understand since you don't have parents," he replied, getting a little angry. "But that's just how it is," he said in a slightly mocking tone, and I finally got angry. "Actually, I don't have parents. My parents divorced when I was young. I don't know my dad, and my mom raised me alone. Her struggles took a toll, and she passed away when I was 30. So it's true. I don't have parents, but I'm not completely alone in the world." Orlando knows this, yet he said that, and I got incredibly angry. "Don't you have any sensitivity?" I thought. Orlando seemed taken aback by my fury. He tried to pass it off as a joke, but I yelled, "There are things you just don't joke about." I was so angry that I exhausted myself, eventually just lying down. Orlando seemed a bit concerned, but he was busy preparing for a wedding we were supposed to attend. I was in no shape to go, so I asked if we could skip it. He flatly refused, saying, "Absolutely not." When I asked why, he said, "I don't know the couple well, but their parents have been a big help to my family for years. My dad told me they helped us financially in the past. We can't miss their child's wedding. I'm sorry, but I have to prioritize this." He said it lightly, so he clearly didn't feel bad. In the end, Orlando left me behind with a suitcase and hat. He even warned me not to contact him during the wedding, saying it would be rude. "If something happens, just call an ambulance or something," he said. This guy's hopeless, I thought. When he returns, we'll need to have a serious talk. I watched him leave without a word, thinking this would be the last time. But surprisingly, I felt lighter with Orlando gone. I even cracked a smile. Now, with a whole day to myself, what should I do? I decided to relax for a few hours since I had no plans. Just as I was dozing off, the doorbell rang suddenly. It was around noon. I checked the monitor, and to my surprise, Harriet, who shouldn't have been here, was standing there. I panicked and rushed to the door. Harriet looked worried and asked, "Are you okay?" I was so shocked that I could only utter a confused huh. Harriet said she heard I was unwell from who, I asked. Orlando, she replied. Then I asked her about the wedding, to which Harriet responded, What wedding? We stared at each other in silence, then decided to talk inside over tea. I asked her what brings her here today. She said she recently bought a shelf, but Palmer hurt his back. She called Orlando to help assemble it, but he said he was busy this Saturday and suggested next week. When I asked Harriet why she came, she told me Orlando said he was going out of state for a friend's funeral. I asked about me, and he said I was unwell and bedridden. I offered to take care of me or check on me, but he said it might make me feel worse, so it's best to leave me alone. Harriet was worried about leaving someone so sick alone, especially when Orlando said I was in bad shape. I was stunned by this completely different story. With trembling lips, I told her the reason Orlando gave me for leaving. Harriet was equally shocked, saying she had no idea. After a silent pause, I resignedly said, Maybe he's with another woman. Harriet's demeanor changed drastically. Hearing her calmly say, That bastard won't get away with this, was terrifying. After an infuriated Harriet asked if I could come to the house now, I was taken to the in-law house where Palmer, who was house-sitting, was. Palmer, understanding the situation, also got furious. He tried calling Orlando, but as expected, couldn't reach him. Palmer started getting annoyed and declared, I'm going to where he is right now. Of course, I stopped him, and after several attempts, finally got through to Orlando. I had put the call on speakerphone, and Orlando, in a deliberately soft voice, said, I'm in the middle of a funeral right now. I'll call you back later. Palmer immediately retorted, What do you mean forgetting us at the wedding? Orlando responded foolishly, What, huh? In a rather loud voice. Hearing this, Palmer said, You're speaking so loudly at a funeral. Well, I guess it's not a funeral. That's why you can talk like that calmly. But Orlando sounded shaken over the phone. Pressing Orlando further, Palmer said, You told Gloria it was a wedding, right? But it's strange. I don't remember ever borrowing money from relatives. Orlando's excuses were all over the place, suggesting a misunderstanding, or that he intended to go to the wedding, but prioritized a coinciding funeral instead. Palmer, tired of Orlando's excuses, exclaimed, Enough already. I know all about your lies. There's no point talking over the phone. Just come back now. I'll listen to your excuses here, but I'm not forgiving you. I, too, was a bit scared listening to Palmer's rage. Orlando seemed to feel the same, but said he couldn't come back right away. When he mentioned bringing me home, I interjected, I'm right here, though. He exclaimed in surprise, Huh. As he kept making nonsensical excuses, I said, Like Palmer said, there's nothing we can do over the phone. Come back now. There's no point talking about it here. Without listening to any more of Orlando's excuses, I hung up the phone. After that incident, I thought about going back home, but my in-laws were worried about leaving me alone. So I decided to stay at their place during that time. Harriet asked me what I was planning to do about Orlando. I told her that I was definitely getting a divorce. It's just not working out anymore. Then, the next day, even though Orlando said he would be back by evening, he returned around 10 in the morning, looking incredibly awkward, and meeting with all four of us started immediately, and as expected, Orlando had gone on a cheating trip. He was with a woman in her 20s whom he had picked up at a bar. They hit it off after some light flirting and ended up having a relationship. This trip was apparently planned at her request. After hearing this, I asked him why he lied about something that involved his parents. He said he thought it would be troublesome if his affair was discovered while he was away, especially to his parents. Palmer, my father-in-law, was furious. He scolded Orlando, saying, You stupid son, not just because Orlando betrayed his wife, but also because he used the excuse of someone's death and his parents for his infidelity. Orlando, who's always been unable to go against his parents, especially Palmer, kept apologizing. But Palmer told him he was apologizing to the wrong person. Orlando then hurriedly apologized to me, but such a cheap apology was not enough for forgiveness. When I said we were getting a divorce, Orlando begged me not to, promising to change his ways. However, I told him, the way you treated and spoke to me when you learned about my illness was bad enough. But to think you would also cheat, I cannot forgive a man like that. Even if we tried to rebuild our relationship now, you might do the same or worse if you got sick. I don't want to become such a terrible person, so let's get divorced. He kept apologizing, ignoring what I said. I told him it's unforgivable. But he continued to apologize. So I got fed up. And eventually, Palmer kicked him out. After that, with the help of my parents-in-law, we started divorce proceedings with a lawyer. Surprisingly, the negotiations went smoothly and were settled without much trouble. However, the affair was only discovered by chance, and if Harry hadn't come, I would have never realized Orlando was cheating. There was almost no evidence of the affair, so the compensation from the other woman was very minimal. But receiving compensation was also a way to prove that the other party was at fault, so I accepted it, thinking it was enough to know that they were guilty. After all, who would want a man who cheats on a sick wife? Orlando was just seen as a wallet, and after everything was settled, he was dumped by his affair partner, which made me laugh. Even after divorcing Orlando, I kept in touch with my parents-in-law. Harriet visits me about twice a month at my new place, and I occasionally visit the in-laws' house. It's nice that we've kept our good relationship. Orlando was disowned by his parents and banned from their house. They were so angry and disgusted with him, saying, "You're no son of ours. We disown you. Go wherever you want." When Orlando heard this, he was shocked. He didn't expect to be disowned. He tried to come back once, thinking they were still family, but Palmer chased him off, saying, "Didn't I tell you not to come here?" and threw water on him. Harriet told me about it, but my parents-in-law always cared for me, so even though I was down for a while after the divorce, I got over it pretty quickly. My health has been improving since the divorce, and I'm planning to return to work soon. I still have to deal with medication and checkups for my illness, but I'll overcome it with my naturally positive attitude. My husband got upset when he saw the remittance to my mom was only $670. "Look at your mom's account," I told him plainly. "My name is Penelope. I'm 42, and I work part-time at a supermarket. I have 2 sons, Ethan in 8th grade and Leo in 6th grade. My husband, Asher, is 43. His mother, my mother-in-law, is 67 and lives alone since her husband passed away. She gets a small pension, but it's not much. When my father-in-law died, we talked about supporting my mother-in-law since she raised Asher and might need help in the future. We decided I would send her $335 every month, treating it like caregiving. We recently paid off the house loan, and Asher's late father left behind $200,000, which Asher agreed to give entirely to his mom as per his father's will. I thought we could manage without income, but my mother-in-law called, upset about the allowance. She couldn't save because she couldn't go to cheaper stores due to COVID. Asher suggested he could buy things for her on his way home from work, but she explained it wasn't just groceries. It was everyday items, so it's not just about buying food, huh? Okay, then I'll go to the specific store for everyday items as well, I said. My mother-in-law exclaimed, "Honestly, do I have to spell it out this much for you to understand? It's not just everyday items and groceries, is it? Things like hair dye to cover gray hair too, that as well." She shouted, basically saying, "Please don't make me explain everything. I'm saying that the allowance isn't enough." "I'm sorry, Mother." My husband's body language seemed overly apologetic towards his mother over the phone. "For now, I'll increase it to $670, he said without consulting me. Huh? $670 is quite a significant amount. I couldn't hide my surprise at the decision made without my consent. Speaking of $670, it's almost like taking all of my part-time job earnings. Plus, Our older child will be taking entrance exams soon, and we can't skip on sending them to cram school. I asked the store manager to increase my part-time hours, but in doing so, it became challenging to manage the household. I explained to my husband, "Mom, you're never home at night." My younger child complained, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Mom is working hard to earn money for us." I replied, feeling guilty that I couldn't even talk about a cool piggy bank my child made. "I made a really cool piggy bank today and got praised for it. But I can't even talk about that now." My child banged on the table, upset. "I'm sorry, I'll buy the toy you wanted for your birthday, so I'll work hard for that," I reassured my child. At that moment, my husband walked by, saying, "Just be patient with the toy. Grandma is making even more sacrifices and going through tough times. Your mother isn't working for the sake of your toys, she's working for your grandmother." His words left me confused. Strangely, our younger child remained and patted my shoulder. "Mom, you're doing your best. I can't wait for the toy, so don't worry," my child comforted me. However, that wavering feeling was once again compounded by my mother-in-law. "Have you received the envelope?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," I replied, sensing what she meant. Today, I received an envelope from her. When I opened it, it contained a copy of a bank statement. I immediately looked at the remaining balance. $6? It's already less than $10, I said unintentionally. My mother-in-law seemed to understand that I had seen the contents of the envelope, and her voice quivered with tears. "And then, due to the price increases, I can't even pay the electricity and gas bills," she sobbed. But I tried to continue speaking while looking at the statement. Then enough. "All you do is talk about do this, do that, spouting off about useless things and dragging your feet. Last time too, it was all about doing errands for household items and groceries, and they were useless solutions. That's why I called at this hour. You're there, aren't you, Asher? Take over for me," she said. From the phone conversation, my husband had already come close and said, "Mom, let me take over," as he took the receiver from me. Yeah. After this exchange, Asher said, "Oh no," letting her use up the entire inheritance, letting the balance drop below $10. "I'm sorry. I think this is definitely a misfortune for my humble parents." Yeah, I understand. So, starting from next month, if I send $2,000 each month, will that be okay?" He blurted it out. $2,000? How on earth could the allowance amount be that much? I stood there in shock as I listened. After he hung up the phone, Asher exclaimed, "Why is the allowance for Mom only $670? I told you at least $670. I thought you had increased it," he shouted angrily. "But you see inside that envelope." I tried to make a counterargument, but he interrupted me and continued, "I told you, I owe her for raising me. In the future, she'll probably become weaker. If you think of it as caregiving expenses, why is it that my mother is in such a heartbreaking situation?" He further escalated his outburst with a louder voice. I was at my limit too. Even the $335 allowance wasn't easy to manage. I thought it was an accomplishment to increase it to $670. I also increased my part-time hours to cope with the situation. I even learned how to cook more budget-friendly meals than before. I managed the household expenses with all of those efforts. But my efforts alone weren't enough, and there were sacrifices I made in return, like the time with my children. Yeah, on top of it all, an additional $2,000, and what's more, without even looking at how our allowances are being used in my mother-in-law's bank statement. She scolded me abruptly and decided on a $2,000 allowance without consulting me. Above all, I'm working for the sake of my sons, not for my mother-in-law. That's enough. A deeply cold voice came from me. I realized that when a person gets too angry, their voice becomes quiet. "What do you mean it's fine? Are you getting defensive now?" In a somewhat mocking tone, my husband looked down on me. I was no longer willing to yield to my husband's words. After having seen a copy of that statement, I absolutely couldn't accept such a ridiculous proposal as a $2,000 allowance. I've had enough of a son who blindly believes and supports a money-seeking mother and grandmother. People who can't prioritize our family don't belong here. Get out if you want to support your mother so badly, then go live with her. You can happily go to hell together. I pushed my husband firmly. Then I kicked him out the front door. And I walked my husband out the front door. I shoved the envelope in his face. I'll send your belongings back, and you'll cover the shipping. Take a close look at the contents of your mother's bank statement. Huh? My husband asked in response, but I just closed the door with a laugh. Bang. What's going on, Mom? Hearing the commotion, our 2 children came downstairs. Well, you two, your father said he wants to spend more money on you. And he asked Grandma to spend more too. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I said to the children, I see. If you decided this, Mom, it must be for the best for this house. I'll follow your lead, my older child said. Well, that toy, I'll wait for it until I'm an adult, no matter how many years it takes, so I'll cheer up. My younger son said to me, thank you, my sons. 1 week later, help me, my husband called me. What about? I replied coldly. Could you at least listen to my story? He stammered. But my husband keeps going, clinging to his speech. I had to stifle my laughter on the phone. I can't believe that you would believe your mother wholeheartedly and then blur out such an outrageous proposal. I can't believe you're calling me now and wanting to get back together. You really have no idea how praising you are, huh? That's just how you are. You're the type who, in moments like this, says huh and questions everything, oblivious to your own indecisiveness. You casually involve others. When pointed out, you react as if it's unexpected. Well, but I suppose it wouldn't hurt to have one final conversation. I want to deliver those last words in person. It's important for the children, and closure matters. I have agreed to meet with my husband in this house. Oh, and make sure to bring all of your mother's credit card statements. Okay, at that moment, my husband and mother-in-law arrived, their lives in disarray. I'm sure I thought this was going to be an absolute bust. If you just calmed down and looked at the statement, you'd have figured it out, I said. You insulted me outright and ended up believing your mother, didn't you? I responded nonchalantly. So, can you show me the statement? My husband put the statement out on the table with trembling hands, and while looking down at it, I asked, what have you learned? And then my mom, she used the money I sent her for electricity, gas, food. It wasn't just for living expenses, he said in a voice barely louder than a mosquito's buzz. It wasn't just for living expenses, was it? Actually, the other purpose was the main one, right? Please say it with your own mouth. She was a member of an escort club. I'll actually get my husband to say it, his withered confession accompanied by my mother-in-law's trembling lips. I was absolutely delighted, and I couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Your mother, whom you believed more than me, was a woman who spent money on male escorts while lying about not being able to pay the increased electricity and gas bills, and came begging to her own son. The statement showed the name of an escort club, Romeo, followed by high-end restaurants and bars. She was spending over $40,000 a month. After a good laugh, I took a sip of cold water to cool down my head and then continued speaking. Even when you're nearly 70 years old, how could you pick a young, handsome guy at an escort club and take him around to all the high-end restaurants? I don't know how she got that way, and how did she end up begging for money at her own son's house? I'm really curious if she ended up addicted or something like that. I scratched at the wound and pride of my mother-in-law. Unexpectedly, my husband spoke. He told me he feels love for the princess who gives him an allowance. He even gives me presents. This made me blow out the water I had been drinking to cool my head. I ended up giggling and laughing. The water had gone to waste. Referring to a 67-year-old as a princess is quite something, isn't it? Well, by uttering words, some people fall for it, like my mother-in-law becoming like a man's personal ATM. So they'll keep saying those words, won't they? However, I took another sip of water. If you're giving an escort guy an allowance, you must be withdrawing a considerable amount, right? It wasn't my mother-in-law who visibly shuddered. Huh. The voice that uttered this was indeed my husband's. I placed a piece of paper on the table. It was a business card with a handwritten message. It was fun meeting you today. I love you. Please request me again. Huh? My husband stared at the business card on the table. I didn't expect to be kicked out of the house all of a sudden. I didn't even tidy up my own room, did I? I found your stuff while I was cleaning up your things. Even the strange money deductions. It all makes sense now, he said. Yes, that's right. So it's not just my fault. My mother-in-law shouted in a loud voice. There was a glass of lemonade in front of her, but she hadn't touched it at all. It might be expected since she had been continuously blamed. However, as the target of blame shifted, she attempted an unexpected turnaround. What? My husband's voice trembled as he reacted to this blow. But because I've been laughed at this much, am I the only one being ridiculous? Isn't that so unfair? No, just wait a minute. You're making me spend this much money. And now you're saying this. That's my line. Asking for money because your allowance isn't enough. I can't believe you're into escort girls too. Like parent, like child. Must be an annoying way to spend money. It's over now, isn't it? Both of you are done, I said. At my words, both my husband and mother-in-law had no words left. Enough is enough. I called the children on the second floor. Come down for a minute. The two children came down. We're parting ways because your dad and grandma have been spending too much money on themselves until now, I said. Your dad has been spending a lot of money on another woman, and your grandma has been spending a lot of money on a younger man. They want even more, I explained candidly. Hold on, don't say that in front of the kids. My husband tried to intervene. No, if we're using money like that, Mom will have no choice but to say something. I don't like you, Dad, trying to hide things, the older child continued. I mean, giving money to other people and then saying there's no money for toys. Don't mess around. I might be okay without toys, but my big brother probably has tutoring fees to pay, the younger one said. That's right, that's right. You see, I want to use the money for your future. Now say goodbye to people who spend their money on strangers, I said. On hearing my words, my older child said, it's goodbye for us too. And my younger child said, I'll learn to do without toys. It's despicable that he spent money on something other than you, Mom. In the end, it was only natural, but I cut ties with both my husband and my mother-in-law. I got a large amount of alimony because of the divorce due to my husband and mother-in-law's spending. On the other hand, my husband and mother-in-law, who had once indulged in frivolous spending, were a regrettable case, and I could anticipate the consequences. They continued to indulge until they hit rock bottom. As a result, it seems they accumulated debts to the extent that they had to let go of the house, even though they have to pay both alimony and child support. What on earth are they doing? Of course, I have no intention of making concessions. I expect them to pay in full. I continued to work part-time after that. We couldn't afford many luxuries, but somehow the three of us managed to lead a decent life. It's modest, but I want to do what I can for the children. I hope to continue living harmoniously with the three of us in the future. My son, who earns a lot of money, and you, who don't work, don't get along. My son and I want to live here now, so please leave right away. One day when my husband, who usually stays in his room, was out, the intercom at my house buzzed a lot. When I opened the door, my mother-in-law was there, looking excited. Surprised by her sudden visit, I asked, "Hello, mother-in-law. What brings you here at this time?" But before I could say anything else, she scolded me for not answering the intercom right away. She didn't believe I was working. She said I was just being lazy. I tried to explain, but she didn't listen. She thought it was unfair that I lived a comfortable life here without working while benefiting from my son's salary. She said my son, and she wanted to start a new life here without me, and she gave me divorce papers to sign. I was shocked, but I didn't show it. I calmly signed the papers. Inside, I felt relieved. But inwardly, I couldn't help but chuckle at how much she misunderstood. She didn't know anything about me. My name is Nancy, and I work from home as a freelance writer and editor. I used to work for a publishing company, so I've used that experience to keep a stable income. Even when I worked at the publishing company, it was normal to work late or on weekends, but the pay was good, and with salary bonuses and rewards from copyrights, I saved a lot. Despite the ups and downs of freelancing, I've been able to live comfortably. I met my husband Dylan while we both worked at the publishing company. He was an aspiring writer, and I supported his passion. Eventually, our appreciation for each other turned into love, and we got married. At first, our marriage was fulfilling. We supported each other's careers. After we got married, I switched to freelancing from home. Until then, I believed that both my husband and in-laws understood and appreciated my work and income. But over time, it seemed like they misunderstood my work more and more. My in-laws held traditional values from their generation. Working from home wasn't common for them, and they saw freelancing as unstable compared to my husband's regular job. So they didn't value my work as much. Additionally, Dylan began boasting to his parents about his success as a renowned writer. Because of this, my in-laws' cold attitude towards me intensified. Every time we met, they'd make sarcastic remarks like, "Oh, well, look, it's Nancy, who doesn't seem to work much. What brings you here today? Looking for a job recommendation?" I tried to reassure my mother-in-law about our financial situation, saying, "If you're concerned about our living expenses, I apologize, but I'm earning well, so there's no need to worry." But she responded sarcastically, implying that I should be more grateful to Dylan, because without him, I'd be in trouble. My mother-in-law had traditional values from her generation, where women typically managed the household while men worked outside. Seeing me work from home, she likely assumed I was avoiding housework. This story highlights the differences in generations and cultures, as well as the misunderstandings and challenges within a family. Mother-in-law, freelancing means that you can earn a good income even without going to an office and working from home. Nowadays, with technological advancements, we can work from anywhere, and my job falls into that category. However, my mother-in-law responded angrily, accusing me of talking back and calling me an unpleasant daughter-in-law. She insisted that it wasn't natural for a young woman to spend her days messing around with a computer at home. These kinds of conversations have been happening more often lately, and I was honestly getting tired of it. I bit back my retort, thinking, not this topic again. In reality, I was the main breadwinner and handled most of the housework, but I didn't say it out loud. At first, her complaints only came up when Dylan wasn't around, but recently, she'd been openly criticizing me, especially during family dinners at her house. It felt more like a session to criticize me than anything else. Despite being invited, only Dylan's portion of food would be on the table, and there was no seat for me, making it very uncomfortable. Moreover, I heard unpleasant comments from her and my father-in-law about me to other relatives. I was often surprised and hurt by their attitudes, but what irritated me more was Dylan's silence. They saw Dylan as a successful author and relied on him for money, often asking him to buy things. This was funded by the money I earned. Initially, it was a small amount, but lately, we were spending almost $2,000 monthly for his parents. I decided to talk to Dylan about it. I told him I wanted him to stop giving my earnings to his parents without asking me first. But his response was colder than I expected. He said, "You're earning money while relaxing at home, right? It's easy money. So why not let my parents use a bit of it?" I was shocked by his words. It felt like the last straw. I felt betrayed, confused, and sad. Even though we faced challenges with his parents and our different backgrounds, I believed Dylan was on my side. That reassurance shattered with his words. Dylan, who I thought understood my feelings and efforts, ended up joining those who mocked me behind my back. I remembered our first date, when he passionately talked about his work, shared dreams, and values. I was drawn to his enthusiasm and sincerity, but lately he seemed to have forgotten his dreams and passion. spending his days aimlessly, often engrossed in games. This was completely different from the person he was when we first met. Games aren't inherently bad, but his obsession made him neglect his passion for writing, which saddened and angered me. I started questioning if I should continue my future with Dylan. If our relationship continued, what would become of my life? Even when I tried to imagine a future with him, I could only see a bleak future. So I decided to divorce him and secretly began looking for a new place to live. I searched online for apartments suitable for singles and visited a few properties for viewing. I focused on apartments with a quiet living environment and strong security. Finally, I decided on one property. One day when Dylan, who usually played games in his room, was out, my mother-in-law visited. I was surprised by her sudden visit, so I opened the door without waiting. She sat on the living room sofa and bluntly said, "Nancy, you should leave this place." I was too shocked to respond. "What are you saying all of a sudden?" I asked. "Isn't it obvious? You're bad at housework, and even after Dylan became a popular author, you haven't changed. Above all, you can't even work properly," she said. "But I've told you many times that it's a misunderstanding, haven't I?" I tried to explain, but my mother-in-law interrupted me, smiling gently. "I plan to live here in support. Dylan taking care of him is much better than looking after that noisy old lady." By noisy old lady, do you mean Dylan's grandmother? Yes, that woman who is technically my mother-in-law. Even though I've done so much for her, she always finds fault, shows no gratitude, and I'm fed up. If I live here, I can take care of Dylan, and he can focus on his work without any hindrance. Isn't that wonderful? With that, she pulled out a piece of paper from the envelope she held. "So, would you please leave this house immediately?" As I listened to her words, I accepted the divorce papers she held out. They had been signed by Dylan. "Did Dylan really sign this?" I asked. "A little while ago, I suggested to Dylan that it might be better for both of you to get a divorce. It seems he was fed up with you too because he signed it without hesitation," she said with a playful tone. Everything that followed happened so quickly. I took my pre-packed bags and promptly decided to move to a new apartment. During the move, I also managed to file the divorce papers, and a new life began. My new life was smoother and more comfortable than I had expected. My small apartment had only essential furniture and appliances, and its simplicity seemed to boost my focus. I was free from complications, and each day was calm and peaceful. I'd wake up to natural light streaming in through the window and the sound of birds chirping in the distance. I could get up whenever I wanted, eat breakfast, and plan my day. When I started working, I'd get so engrossed that time would fly by. It felt heavenly not having to worry about the gaze and expectations of Dylan and my parents-in-law, and to be able to work at my own pace. One day, as I was engrossed in work at my desk, my smartphone vibrated. It was a call from Dylan. I hesitated but decided to answer. "Nancy, please come back right now," a desperate Dylan pleaded. "Why would you want me to come back all of a sudden?" I asked. To be honest, my parents found out I lied about being a popular author. I'm under immense pressure now. They're even talking about moving in, expecting to live off my earnings. So please, can you come back? I see. But returning isn't that simple. You chose to sign the divorce papers, didn't you? So did I. We're not on the same path anymore. So deal with your issues yourself. It's none of my business, I responded firmly. His voice was a mix of desperation and sadness. But I believe we should be together. Please come back. We've chosen different lives now, I said firmly. I could hear Dylan taking a deep breath on the other end. I understand. But since the divorce, there have been many troubles, and it's costing me a lot. I need assistance with expenses like the care fees for our parents and compensations for the chaos it caused. Why are you suddenly talking about this? I think your decisions played a part in ruining all of my plans. How dare you? Remember when we were married? How you and your parents mocked me? I didn't want to say this, but now you seem like an enemy. Your financial troubles arise because you don't work properly. Find another way to sort it out. I wish you wouldn't rely on me for everything," I said, feeling a mix of frustration and anger. With that, I ended the call. Despite numerous subsequent calls from Dylan, I blocked him and changed my number. A few months later, I happened to pass by where his house used to be. Instead of his house, there was now just an empty land. A nearby resident told me about the recent disputes at his place, with the police getting involved at times. The neighbor's words seemed to contain all the emotions of the situation. "You must have gone through a lot too. There must have been a lot of turmoil leading to the loss of his house." I stood there for a while, reflecting on our past. The unexpected outcome might be some kind of karma. Dylan's little lie had such a significant impact, more unbelievable than any story he might have written. From then on, I pledged to myself to live honestly, expressing my feelings and thoughts without lies or pretense, no matter how challenging things get. I recognized the importance of conveying the truth and cherishing genuine feelings.